Thank you. So before we have our discussion, which I'm very excited to have about this wonderful film, we have a very special video message from Goldie Hawn.
Sometimes in your life, blessings come to you, unexpected. Sugarland Express was certainly one of them. Steven Spielberg was an amazing blessing in my life too, because he saw something. He saw something in me that no one did. I was able to play my favorite character I've ever played, Eugene Poplin. In fact, it took me probably 2 months to get her out of my system. It was the most beautiful time. We were like children actually making a movie, and we were in our early 20s. But I can't tell you what blessing it is not only to have worked with Steven in his first theatrical film, but to know him over all these years, admire him, love him, and amazed that this young man that I worked with so many years ago has made movies that will go on and on and on and live forever. I love you, Steven.
So why don't we start at the beginning of this, which is, how did this project originate? Was this your idea? Did you come up with it? Were you approached to make the film?
No, I was at the time, I was doing television, and I had done Duel, and I was working, I was living in the Valley near Universal Studios, and I subscribed to a small Valley paper called the Citizen News. And I went to get the paper one morning, and the headline of the paper was Modern Day Bonnie and Clyde. And it was the story of this couple in Texas, Bobby and Isla Faye Dent, who, in order to get their baby back from child welfare, led a multi-car police chase through Texas. And it just seemed like a kind of an incredible story. And in those days, there was no way to research a news story unless you could call the reporter and ask the reporter what were his sources. So I just took that on face value and went to two friends of mine, Hal Barwood and Matthew Robbins, and sent them the article and said, this could make a really cool film. Should we do this together? And that's how the whole thing began.
And was the reception from Hollywood pretty warm? I mean, did it take a lot to kind of get this off the ground? You'd had some success in TV, but you hadn't had a lot of feature work. You had none.
No, but Duel was a very, very good thing for me, because I had people sending me scripts after Duel came on ABC. So I got a lot of scripts, feature scripts. So they were already, several studios were trying to get me to do their movies, and I didn't really care for any of the films that were being set. And I was still working on Sugarland, because that's the film I wanted to make. But Universal, at the time under Jennings Lang, pretty much said, we love the script, but you can't make the film without a movie star, and we're not going to finance it without a movie star. So I had, and my first choice really was Goldie for this, and so they sent Richard Zanuck and David Brown had just come over from Fox to Universal. They had an independent deal at Universal, and they loved the script. And they were the ones that sent Goldie the script. And the next day, Goldie called them up, and David Brown called me one day and said, can you go up to Goldie's house today? She wants to talk to you about your screenplay. And I went up to Goldie's house and met her, and that was the beginning of the movie wouldn't have gotten made without her.
What made you think of her? Because at that point, I mean, she'd done Cactus Flower, she'd done Laugh-In, but this is really different. In fact, when you're watching it, you kind of forget it's Goldie Hawn when you're watching this film.
There was just something about Goldie. I had never met Goldie before. I had seen, Butterflies Are Free. I'd seen Cactus Flower. I'd seen her. Certainly, we all saw her in Laugh-In. But there was just something about that character of Eugene Poplin that there was an element of the character, a kind of bucolic element that reminded me of the sort of simplicity of Goldie's heart. And she has a beautifully, not a simplistic heart, but she has a very pure and honest heart. And there was something about the character so yearning to get her baby back, and Goldie's own whatever she puts out there that we all see when we go to see her in movies. But I just felt it would be risky, but it would be great, and it was risky. And the reason the film didn't make any money at the box office was people came to see the movie expecting a Goldie Hawn picture, and they wound up with an ending like that.
Let's talk a little bit about the rest of the cast. William Atherton, what was his background? How did you find him, and why did you think he was right for this role?
He came in to read, and he was from the stage, and he read for me. He was fantastic, and at one point, of course, the studio kept saying, "Who's the guy going to be? Who's going to play opposite Goldie?" And so they gave me a list of names they wanted me to try, and I'm not going to mention the names because most of them are still around today, but they all said no. And I had lunch with all of them. At the restaurant that's in Annie Hall on Sunset Boulevard called The Source, where Annie goes and breaks up with him when he flies back to LA. I met with, and every single, just like Annie Hall, every single actor said no to me at that restaurant. It might have even been that table. And so the studio allowed me to look for, stage actors, and William was somebody who I thought would be amazing, and Michael Sachs. I had loved him in the movie that George Roy Hill directed called Slaughterhouse-Five. I thought Michael was extraordinary in that film.
And what about Ben Johnson? Had you been a fan of his from John Ford films? And
No, since Mighty Joe Young.
Yeah.
All the way back then.
Yeah.
I thought Ben was incredible, and he had done The Last Picture Show before this, and I was lucky. I couldn't believe he was going to say yes to this. He liked the part. Said yes. A great guy to work with too, except he chaws a lot. Which means when you're giving him direction through the window of a car, you got to step aside because that chaw's got to go out the window at some point. So, but I didn't. But aside from that, he was an incredible professional, and he had the patience of Job. He just was everything. He takes in his stride.
What was his approach to things? Did he just has such an amazing presence. Your eye goes to him. Did he want to talk a lot about motivation, or did he just kind of do his thing?
No, he just basically said, "Where do I stand?" And most of the time he was sitting in a car, but he wanted to do his own driving. He really asked, "Can I not be double? I'd love to do my own driving," which he did. And there's one shot in the film, which was a very difficult shot to do because it wasn't on a tow rig. Bob Gottschalk at Panavision had for the first time in years invented a small sound camera where you didn't need to put a huge big Mitchell blimp over the chassis of the Mitchell camera. And it was called a Panaflex. And Clint Eastwood was supposed to get it for his first feature, Play Misty for Me. And they didn't finish the camera in time, so Clint only got to use the camera for 2 weeks. And then the camera came right to me a week late. So I had been shooting for a week on big Mitchell cameras, and then the little Panaflex shows up. And I designed a shot to kind of show it off to Bob Gottschalk, to show what a great thing it is to have a small camera that could be sitting on a monopod in the back seat of a car. I did a 360-degree shot just to show off what the camera could do. And Ben, and Michael Sachs, the actors, drove that shot. There was no crew around. It was 360.
What about Goldie's approach to the character and her chemistry with William Atherton too? How did that work? What were they like to work with?
Well, what Goldie just said, which really moved me. We were kids. We were all in our 20s. I was, 25, 26 years old, and we were all kids then, and there were a lot of laughs. I mean, Bill Atherton was a very serious actor, and Bill obviously took the role very seriously. Goldie took the role very seriously too, but between takes, Goldie was she's the greatest laugher I have ever met in my life. And her laugh is infectious. And Goldie kind of kept the whole thing bouncing along. But there was no real, it was, and also I didn't have a lot of days to shoot the movie, and we had all those cars, and it was logistically a difficult first film to do. It was mostly it was just work.
Yeah, when you look back at this, I mean, you said you were 25, you were 26. I don't even know what I was doing when I was 25 or 26. Certainly not directing a movie. how did you have the confidence to kind of command a set like that and to show up? And now that you're a little older, when you look back, are you amazed that you actually were able to do something like that at that age?
Well, you have to remember I had 5 years of television experience. I started very young. I was 22 when I directed my first professional show for NBC, a pilot called Night Gallery. I had this, it was a trilogy, and I had the middle episode. Oh, you saw that gallery, it was great. With Joan Crawford and Barry Sullivan and Tom Bosley. And after that, I did 5 years of TV, including Duel and The Savage Report, an unsold pilot, and then another TV movie called Something Evil with Sandy Dennis. And so it's not like I kind of, fell off the turnip truck and jumped into Sugarland Express. I had been very, very accustomed to the pressure of television. And the great thing in those days about shooting television is you only had 6 days to do an hour show. And in those days, the shows were like, with commercials, an hour show was something like 51 minutes. It was a real hour, and that was tremendous and valuable experience for me.
Can we talk a little bit about the cinematography and the cinematographer too? Yeah. Vilmos Zsigmond, how did you connect with him? He was on, I was looking at his IMDb, I mean, just like an amazing run of movies at this point too. McCabe and Mrs. Miller, Deliverance, Scarecrow. How did you connect with him?
Well, he was my favorite cinematographer, and he was the only person I went to. And I just I phoned him, and he met me for lunch, and we talked about, and we really, knew this. We loved the same movies. So many movies we loved the same movies, and we loved the same cinematographers. And he knew all the cinematographers from the 30s and 40s. Our favorite being Greg Toland, both of us. That was our favorite cinematographer. And so we just hit it off, and I was amazed that he said he would do it.
And when it came to kind of the look of the film, it looked like, I mean, I have no idea, but did you use a lot of natural light? It seemed like that to the trained eye. How did you kind of come up with the palette of the film too?
Vilmos really came up with the idea of flashing the film. In the old days when everything was shot on film, you could kind of pre-flash the negative, and it's a process where you pre-expose the negative. And what it does is it gives you a better balance between outside and inside a car. And Vilmos didn't think you could get a balance on the faces without the background burning out unless you could flash the film. That's why the film has a little bit on those car scenes of a milky quality, especially when you're inside the car. But it was really worth it because he didn't need lights. He didn't put lights up at all. We just used natural light for that.
And what were the challenges of kind of, you're in cars the whole time, so was it difficult to kind of keep, I mean, obviously you are moving forward when you're in a car, but the location itself is fairly, there's a sameness to it, so how do you kind of make it dramatically interesting?
Well, I thought that the story was dramatically interesting enough, and I didn't think that I love the fact that it was Texas, because the story in real life took place in Texas, and it's so flat there. We had to drive 100 miles and move the whole crew to another series of motels just to get that scene with all those hills to go up and down, where the cars kind of rise out of the ground. That's like rare for Texas. We found the one place that had that location, and that was really topographically kind of interesting. But for the most part, it's about the faces, about the characters. It's about who they are to each other. It's about, the common decency of a character like Captain Tanner, Ben Johnson, in not allowing the marksman to take him out when it happened, and then the absolutely incomprehensible decision he made to eventually to let them get to the house and ambush them. I mean, the complexity was more into the people than it was in the landscape.
What about shooting in Texas? Because Texas, I mean, it's a cliche to say these things, but like it is a character in the film. I mean, it's so vivid. Was that something that you were really insistent on, that it be shot in Texas? And how did you kind of take advantage of that too?
Well, the story took place in Texas, and so I went to Texas and I did ride-alongs with the Department of Public Safety. The Texas Department of Public Safety let me ride along on some of their, some of their patrols and the routines. got to hear what the guys sounded like, got to know some of them pretty well, went to dispatch and heard, actually the voices, everybody on the radio talking to Captain Tanner are the actual dispatchers, whether in Houston or San Antonio. Those were the actual dispatchers that they came and read the lines, and they sounded pretty real. And in the casting of the movie in Texas also, Sherry Rhodes was a local casting director in Texas. She was amazing. And after this, I asked her to cast Jaws for me. And I said to Sherry, can you get some real people to be in this movie? Why does everybody have to be an actor? Why can't you go to a bar and find Buster Daniels? Can you find a drunk for me? She went into a bar and she pulled this old guy out. And he's the guy in the back seat with Michael, And that was all his own dialogue. I just had them riff between them. I said, talk to the cop, Buster, talk to the cop. And so he said, I think I picked peas with you on the pea farm one time before you got that hog leg on. And that was him. That's what Buster said. So a lot of the actors that don't seem like actors is because they weren't, and what they said is what they said, not what we wrote for them to say.
Was the elderly couple, were they also?
No, the older man was not an actor, but Jessie, the woman, was an actor. She had done the Lax Picture Show before she did Sugarland for Peter Bogdanovich.
Oh, they're amazing, yeah. So also, did you storyboard this a lot? What kind of planning did you do in that regard?
It was a lot of storyboarding, especially on anything involving the cars. And so there were a lot of storyboards on the film. And because I had recently come off Duel, where the whole thing was kind of a mural, I had actually planned Duel by having the art department make a mural of the whole story, which wrapped around my motel room on every wall, covered some windows, but I was able to check off the work. I only had 10 days to shoot Duel, and this film I had, I think, 50 days. And so I just basically brought the storyboarding technique into Sugarland, and it was invaluable. I couldn't have made the film on schedule without the storyboards.
So when you come to something like this, though, so of course I understand why storyboarding would be so helpful, but there's so many moments in this movie that feel kind of like stolen bits of realism or something, like the kid and the dog, or I'm trying to even think what else. The reaction shot of the boy with the retainer, or these
right.
little
Right.
Do you have to be kind of you come in prepared, but you also have to be open?
Yeah, I mean, the preparation is your net. That's the net. If you have no original thought that day, you go to the net, and that's what you shoot. But every day we're always presented some opportunity with crowds or with people in the crowds I would pull out because they were interesting. At one point, I had this young person give Lou Jean a little baby pig through the window of the car. And Lou Jean gets the pig and the camera's rolling outside the car, and all of a sudden the pig pees all over Goldie. And Goldie actually says, and she actually looks at the camera just for a glimpse, says, it's peeing on me, and that happened, so I left it in. But every day something new, of course, happens. Every day a new opportunity avails itself. And I think everything, unless you're changing significantly the narrative that you've got the story you have to tell. If you don't change that significantly, all the details are the most fun parts of the film for me.
This film also marks a very important collaboration for you. It's the first film that you did with John Williams, and I wonder, how did your universes collide, and what do you remember about this experience too with him?
Well, I had been such a rabid fan of John's scores. I used to collect soundtrack albums since I was a kid. First thing I ever collected, my parents bought me a soundtrack, Laith Stevens' Destination Moon, back in the mid-50s. That was the first soundtrack album. West Side Story was the first musical album I had, and Destination Moon was the first soundtrack. So I collected dozens of soundtracks, and I'd listened to a score Johnny had written for a Mark Rydell film called The Reavers, and I was writing a script with a writing partner, and I played The Reavers, the record, 78 record, over and over and over again. I did the rewrite. My writing partner wrote the whole script, but she didn't want to do the rewrite, and I volunteered to do the rewrite, and I wore the record out, and I vowed that if I ever get a chance to make a feature film, whoever this, I assumed he was British, this guy John Williams, I want him to be the one to score it. So when Sugarland was a reality and I was actually making the movie, one of the first people I got in touch with was John. We met and had lunch, and that was the beginning of, this is our 52nd year together, actually 51st year together, working together, yeah.
And the harmonica?
The harmonica is a great harmonica player that Johnny knew named Toots Thielman, and I mean, harmonica. It's a great art form, the harmonica. I mean, Springsteen's pretty good on it too, as is, but in the sense of the complexity of turning our harmonica into an orchestral instrument, that Toots was just a savant.
This film feels very, when you look back on it, I mean, it feels very prescient about kind of the way that we turn criminals into folk heroes and the sort of media frenzy that these kinds of events can inspire. I mean, I wonder when you look back and you see this, I mean, what are your feelings about that, and that as a theme, why did that interest you?
Well, it was in the shadow. As I said, this newspaper headline said a modern day Bonnie and Clyde. So it was in not so much the shadow, but the illumination of Bonnie and Clyde as a cultural sort of phenomenon. Certainly not a cinema verite movie. Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway are not exactly cinema verite actors, so nothing like the real Bonnie and Clyde. But also the shooting, there was so much violence in Bonnie and Clyde. I had never really seen a movie as violent as Bonnie and Clyde when it came out, and so that had really influenced me and inspired my entire generation. So I didn't think of this movie so much as folk heroes. I knew about folk heroes from Billy Wilder's Ace in the Hole. And the first time I had seen a movie about a folk hero who essentially is a commodity of the media and of a very voracious, ambitious, and heartless media that turned that poor guy into a kind of, folk hero. And so that was sort of floating around in the era of the 60s and the 70s. That was out there.
But your film has like a big heartedness to it. Like the cops aren't villains. You feel sympathetic for Goldie and her husband for Clovis. I mean, was that important to you too, that there not be kind of a delineation between them?
Well, it's just that, how does the outside world understand what's happening in the inside of that car? And where is that disconnect? And the only link between the inside world and the outside world is the Ben Johnson character. He's the only one that sees the humanity, especially when Lou Jean, Captain Tanner's pushing them up that hill. And Lou Jean's looking at Captain Tanner, they're looking at each other, and Jean just writes hi in the window, H-I. And he gives her the smallest smile. And you realize that for a while they're going to be safe because of that one little moment.
This might be something that's more of an important moment in kind of my life generationally, but I wonder when you watched the O.J. Simpson Bronco chase, did you think about this film?
I did. I did. I said, shit, they're stealing my thunder.
I'm not sure that if this is also accurate, but I was reading and doing some preparation for this that you wanted to reshoot the ending, that you were worried it was too downbeat. Is that accurate, first of all, and what were your thoughts about it?
I discussed with Hal and Matthew about reshooting the ending, and they said, "What are you, crazy?" They talked me immediately out of it. But then when the studio saw the film, the studio was really not upset with the film; they were upset with the ending, and they said, "We need to put a legend at the end of the film that says that she got her baby back." And I said, "No, you can't do that. The ending is what it is." And they said, we won't get anybody to see the movie unless we tell them that the baby's okay and the mom got the baby back. And I protested this as far as I possibly could. I couldn't go very far with that. And the studio pretty much said, no, you're going to put that legend on the end of the picture. And they did. And it didn't work, as people still didn't come out and see the movie. And I got that news. I was prepping Jaws on Martha's Vineyard when I got the news that nobody's going to see Sugarland Express. We got good reviews, but nobody went to see it. And they pulled it from theaters, I think, after 2 weeks. So you're the first audience that's ever seen the Sugarland Express in 50 years. Tribeca, yes. Thank you.
This film, though, shares some important DNA with Jaws, not just that you directed both, of course, but the producers are the same. And did Richard Zanuck and David Brown approach you about Jaws while you were making the film, or was it after?
Well, what happened was when I was making the film, we became very, let me first say, David Brown is one of the most incredible literary producers this town's ever seen. And Dick Zanuck is just an extraordinary, almost like a, just a second. It looks like you've taken a hard fall. Apple Watch, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, I'm not going to press the SOS emergency. Sorry, I'll get it later. I need it.
Sorry. Jaws.
Jaws. Dick and David were amazing producers, and when Dick and David saw Sugarland, I'll never forget this. I only did this to it when I became a producer. I did this one time to a director, and I'll tell you who that director was. But when the movie ended, when they saw the rough cut of the film, Dick Zanuck had a big notepad. He came into the theater with a big notepad and a pencil. And I didn't watch that, but when at the end of the movie, Dick turned around and he tore off the notes and he handed me all these notes, and I reached out, took the notes, and they were all blank pages. I'll never forget that. I did the same thing when Barry Sonnenfeld directed the first Men in Black, which we produced, and showed me the rough cut. I did the same thing. I gave him blank pages of notes and said, those are my notes. But they were incredible, and what happened was, they had the galleys of this book in their office, just sitting out, called Jaws. I didn't know what it was. I was intrigued, and I went over to the assistant of Dick, and I said, can I read this? And she didn't care. She said, yeah, take it home. And so I read it over a weekend, and wait a second. And I read it over the weekend, and I was floored by it. And I asked them if I could, if they would consider having me direct this, and they had already put a director on. There had already been a director assigned to it. And then about a month later, when that didn't work out, they offered me the movie, which was amazing.
And Richard Zanuck's son is in this film, right? He plays
Harrison Zanuck is Baby Langston. That's Harrison Zanuck, Richard Zanuck's son. Yeah.
Now this might be apocryphal, but I also heard that in reading on the internet, which never lies, that you bought the patrol car. Is that true?
I did. I listen. This is crazy. When I bought the patrol car, it had 55 bullet holes in it, and I used to drive around LA to Universal, back to my house in Laurel Canyon in that patrol car. It was insane. I was insane then. I never would do that today ever. That was crazy.
Well, will you join me in thanking Steven Spielberg?